As part of our commitment here at the MeidasTouch Network to delivering the best analysis of voting data that's available, we're bringing on Matthew Dowd to talk about not just the polling that's out there, because I know lots of you have lots of questions about that, but also what we're seeing on the ground in the early vote. Who's voting early? Can we extrapolate any trends at this point? You know, this is part of our continuing series here where we only bring on the MeidasTouch Network the best data analysts available for this stuff. That's why we bring you Simon Rosenberg, Tom Bonnier, and Matthew Dowd. I think there's anybody who's really as experienced as you, Matthew. You've run Democratic campaigns, Republican campaigns. You know, you were a chief strategist in the Bush-Cheney election in 2004. You worked in the Schwarzenegger campaign. You're a leader in the pro-democracy movement today, but you know data. That's the point I want to make on the outset. So let me just show our viewers what you posted earlier today. And here's some of the polling that's the better polling that's out there. You go, there have been 6 national nonpartisan polls released in the last 3 days. Harris +3, +1, +4, +4, +1, +4. 1 week left, run through the tape, work until the clock strikes 0. So tell us, what can we glean from the final polling, but what else are you seeing on the ground right now, Matt?
Sure, great to be with you, and thanks for all you do for the democracy, in our country. Bravo to you and everybody that works here. I mean, I've been pretty much saying the same thing for 8 weeks. This race, once it adjusted to the vice president being on the ticket and gone and sort of people getting acquainted with that, it's been about a 3-point race for 2 months, basically. And it's not changed that much in spite of the media sort of fixation on certain things. And I know you've talked to others about the polls, the junk polls that are put out and have been put out over the course of the last month or so. Just what happened in 2022, though it's actually worse this year in my view. And I would add to that tweet, since that tweet, there's been another national poll, a nonpartisan national poll, that has her up too. So there's basically been 7 that show this race somewhere between 2 and 3 points, about what I thought it would be in this election. And so I think the national polling has all been pretty stable. There's been obviously outliers with what happens when you have a 2 or 3 point race. There's been bad polls done, but for all intents and purposes, she has a pretty good 2 or 3 point lead. It could get up to 4, depending on turnout patterns and all that. So that's on one hand on the national polling, which is important for people to understand, because the national polling is going to move or fluctuate sort of in line with what the state polling does. It's not, those two things aren't going to move separately. It's not like you're going to close the gap on the nationals and the electoral college is going to stay the same. Those things should move substantially the same. And when you look at the electoral college, it's basically in line with a 2 or 3 point national Harris lead, which means you win Michigan, but not by much. And there's a nonpartisan poll out today that has her up 5 in Michigan. I don't think that's it. I think she's more up at what the national number is. I think she's up in Pennsylvania at what the national number is. I think she's up in Wisconsin at what the national number is when you throw out the trash polls and all of that. I think North Carolina, to me, is actually outside of everything else I focus on, is the most interesting story, because in my view, looking at the data, both the early vote data and the polling data, I think she squeaks out North Carolina, which will be a huge thing to happen, because it's it'll be the first swing state called, because the polls close early. And I think it's a state that will send, if she wins it, send an unbelievable signal to the Republicans that this isn't about taking votes in Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin or Nevada or Arizona. This is a state that they won, they now lost. And so I think all of the data is signaling well, but it is a close race, and it's going to depend on the next 100 million people that vote, which is what is probably left to vote here. Maybe 110 more million people have to vote in the next week. And so I think the signs are all good in a close race for her. But it's a close race. I mean, George W. Bush in 2004, when I was chief strategist, he won by 2.6%. So it was something we were worried about and concentrated on all the way up until the polls closed on election day.
I think that's such an important point you made there. People are out there saying, why are these elections so close? Frankly, they've always been close, and it's a divided country. You point to the 2.6% right there in that Bush-Kerry race. Let's talk about, though, these early voting patterns. A lot of people are hearing there's a lot more Republicans voting early right now. You're also hearing, though, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's all voting for Trump. There's a lot of independents, non-party affiliated voting, especially as you mentioned, North Carolina. We see a big number there in North Carolina. What do you make of the actual early voting trends, both the kind of aggregate big number of how many people have voted, but then when you're looking at the various states, are we seeing something that's unexpected, expected? We know that the Republicans, and with the Musk machine of literally hundreds of millions of dollars, they're emphasizing early vote, early vote. But are we seeing any changes?
Great. I think this is a really important question. So I'm one of the ones that constantly says, don't read too much into the early vote for a variety of reasons. We don't know how the unaffiliated people are voting in this. We don't know what the bleed off in the early vote of people that are Democratic registered and how many percentage, though small, would vote for Trump, or how many, more importantly, percentage of Republicans who early vote are voting for the vice president in this. And so I counsel people don't read too much into this on both ways. And so there's been this spin, I think, that's developed over the course of the last few days that somehow the Republicans are winning the early vote. They're not. Nationally, they're not. And in the given states, they're not. They constantly try to sort of point out, well, I have higher numbers than they did last time. Well, they have higher numbers because they didn't vote early last time. And so what they're doing, and I'm sure others have talked about this, is many of the Republicans are it's basically 95% of the Republican vote early right now is cannibalized vote that they would have on election day. So it's not additive votes. They're not adding right now a lot of extra votes because of early voting. They're just moving an election day voter to early vote. And so I think all of it is patterning going as I expected. I thought more Republicans would vote early because they've emphasized it more, and we're not in COVID and we don't have that we're dealing with. I think Democrats, as shown in 2022, began to vote more on election day again than they did before, as they didn't do during COVID. I'll counsel people on one state that Republicans seem to be talking about, and a person who I think is smart, but I think has jumped the gun or jumped the shark, whatever the right thing is John Ralston in Nevada. And so I will remind, he's sort of signaled, oh, this is a huge problem for Democrats. They're not banking the votes. First of all, only half the vote has been cast that will be cast in Nevada, so we don't really know. Secondly, as what I said, we don't know what she's getting among independents, and we don't know what she's getting among Republicans of the early vote. And thirdly, I'll remind people, John Ralston said the exact same thing in 2022. He put out all of these notes and all of these things because of the early vote and said, this is real problems for the senator running for re-election, the Democratic senator running for re-election. This is bad. Republicans have an advantage. And in the end, all of that shifted in the final 48 hours, and the Democratic senator won. And so my counsel is don't read too much into it. I'll give you one piece of data that I think is important. There was a poll out today that polled North Carolina. And about 35 or 38% of people have already voted in North Carolina. And they broke that poll out in North Carolina, which is a pretty big number in a poll. It's about 38% of the sample has already voted. Of those people that have already voted, Harris is leading Donald Trump 50-47. And that is an electorate, when you looked at the registration of who's voted, has a slight Republican advantage. More Republicans who are registered have voted more early than Democrats, which means two things is happening in North Carolina, in my view. One, she's bleeding off more Republicans than people envisioned. And two, she's doing much better among independents than people envisioned. Because the only way she can have a 3-point advantage in early vote in North Carolina, with Republicans having voted more, is that she's getting more Republicans than he's getting Democrats, and she's winning the independent vote by a large enough margin.
I built this thesis over the past 3.5 years here. If you go back really since January 6th, a few weeks out, we've been talking about it. I said, there's a political realignment that's taking place. And the data I was getting was anecdotal, but I was getting thousands of stories that were tens of thousands of stories, then hundreds of thousands of stories. I wasn't even asking for the stories. People would say, I was a Republican my whole life. I voted for Trump twice my entire life. After January 6th, I can't support him. Then after Roe, I got more of those. I can't, after Roe's overturned, I can't support Donald Trump. So what I've been saying is, I just think that the language that's being used by corporate media to even discuss the differences in political parties, liberal v conservative, progressive, I go, that's not really it. I mean, I don't think people are seeing it. There's kind of pro-democracy, classic Republicans, Democrats, progressives, if you will. And then there's this MAGA Trump thing that's out there. And, when we looked at the primary data not too long ago, 6 months ago, I remember Donald Trump would underperform in close primaries, that 538 average by like big margins. Like it wasn't like small. It was like he underperformed Michigan 15 points, like he underperformed Pennsylvania. And we would report on each one. It would be like, whoa, big deal. And then people stopped talking about that, like as though we didn't actually have a data set of actual voters who were picking Nikki Haley over him in closed Republican primaries 6 months ago when real people were actually voting. So do you make it? You talked about North Carolina. Do you make anything of that, of a broader trend there? Do you think Republicans supporting Kamala is going to be one of the big stories when all's said and done at the end of this? Or am I getting high on my own supply of anecdotal comments that I get?
Well, I agree with everything you said because I have noticed the same things. And one thing I said 6 weeks ago, that I thought the polls were underestimating the vice president's support and Democrat support, a la what happened in 2022 in a lot of the key states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, as opposed to underestimating the Trump vote. And I think we're seeing that as we get polling data among the people that have already voted, with that the models that the media had, news media and the polling media have built on, they always use the wrong one, which is the one they happened last time or the time before. They made it a judgment that this was going to be a race like 2020 and 2016. It's not. I actually think the race it's most akin to is 2012. Where Obama won by 3.9%, but in the final 3 weeks of the race, it was tied with Romney ahead at times and Obama ahead at times. And then on election day, all of a sudden, people were like, where did all these Democrats come from in all these given states? And Obama went up and ended up winning in a race that people forgot how close was in the final weeks of this. And so I actually think we need to strip all this liberal conservative stuff out of our language. It doesn't mean anything anymore. The Trump movement, who calls themselves aren't conservatives, and the people that are now, many of the people that are supporting Harris aren't quote unquote liberal. I just think it doesn't apply anymore to people. I think it's democracy and decency. Democracy and decency is the group that I think has the majority of the country, and they just need to be turned out. It's democracy and decency.
You talked about that Obama-Romney race. These historical perspectives, I think, are helpful for people when they see these trends and have good historical examples. I mean, you mentioned the Bush-Kerry race, 2.6, 2.7. I mean, at times, right around this time, there were polls showing that Romney was going to win in 2012, and that's not ultimately what happened. But let's not forget there's days right now until the election. And Donald Trump's not a good closer. His entire life, he's ended up destroying things that, he's hyped up and then he's bankrupted it. And, one of the things that, of course, everybody's talking about is the fallout from this Madison Square Garden event, offending every group, specifically, though, Puerto Ricans in swing states right now. How big of a deal do you think that is? As these campaigns wrap, where you have Vice President Kamala Harris on the one hand, massive crowds, stadiums, 50,000 plus in Washington, going to be in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, we see the emptying of the crowds, people leaving halfway through, and he's offending kind of, core bases of voters. It's kind of the final message. What's your view there?
So my view is these are, as a campaign strategist and purpose of person in campaigns, these are the things that you worry the most about in the end of a campaign. It's not the ads you're putting on, because the ads you're putting on in the final 10 days or 2 weeks, while important, they're not that important. The messaging is already sort of sunk in, it's baked in. The switch out of certain ads doesn't matter all that much in the course of this. You run through it, you run through the end, and there you do it. What you don't know about is unknown or unexpected events, usually negative in the final 2 weeks, that impact your campaign. And I think, so I'll give you an example. What happened in 2000 when I was working for Bush in the 2000 race, we thought we had a slight lead, and that we were going to be fine in the Electoral College and everything was going to be okay. We were going to carry Florida, carry Michigan, carry Ohio. It was all fine. The DUI story breaks, which is sort of when you lean back and look at it, a DUI story from 24 years before, it seems winsome in today's day and age of everything that's going on. That story broke on a Thursday before Election Day. That story moved our numbers downward by 1 or 2 points. Not people switching from Bush to Gore, but Bush supporters being demotivated in the course of the race, just basically saying, I'm not going to vote for him. It turned Florida into a state that we thought we were winning by 1 or 2 to a state that was tied, because I did tracking poll in the end. And so these kind of stories, and I think there's been 2 of them, though this latest one I think has seemingly become more traction. There's been 2 bad stories that were unexpected in the final 2 weeks of this race that have hurt Donald Trump, in my view, or hurt motivation of Donald Trump supporters. First was the General Kelly story of him coming out and describing Donald Trump for what he is, which is a fascist. And doing that hurt Donald Trump. And that drove 2 or 3 or 4 days of stories that Donald Trump couldn't get out of. Then we have this Madison Square Garden Boond event that might as well have been 1939 with color. And that's Joke This Play, which is along with all the other stuff, has taken off virally. And I would counsel people that, it's going to hurt him maybe among Puerto Ricans, but they were already voting with him, so it's not going to matter that much. No. What it's going to do is going to motivate people. It's going to also motivate Latinos who aren't Puerto Rican. It's going to motivate Blacks who actually see this for what it is. When he calls one group, they know he feels the same way about their group. And 4, it affects moderate white voters in suburban and urban areas because they don't want to be grouped with racists. They're sensitive to that. And though they may say Donald Trump's better on the economy, they don't want to be a part of that. And so when you go in the last 10 days of a campaign and the moments that happened, which have happened thus far, that occupy a huge part of the conversation, it gets you off your message. It motivates the voters that are against you and demotivates your voters. And that's what's happened to Donald Trump in the final 10 days.
Matthew Dowd, final word to all our viewers out there. I hope to get you back before the election itself, but what do you want to tell anybody out there who's still worried?
So it's okay to worry. It's not okay to sit in anxiety. And so my thing is, just like in your personal lives, you want to make change, you want to do something and you're nervous about it, put it aside and just do some action. And so I would say a close election, she's got this. In my view, she's going to win. She'll win nationally. She'll win the Electoral College, but it's contingent upon the work in the next 7 days or 6 days that puts this thing over the top. So run through the tape, work till the clock hits 000. She's got this. She's doing a great job. Tonight's event at the Ellipse, I think, will be awesome. And in the contrast to the Madison Square Garden. So we just have to do the work to help our quarterback get it into the end zone.
And if anybody wants to help out, events.democrats.org. There's different events you can do, phone banking, this or that. Again, it's events.democrats.org. Matthew Dowd, come back on the MeidasTouch Network. We always love having you here. Thanks for everything you're doing.
My pleasure. You too, brother.
All right, hit subscribe and let's get to 4 million YouTube subscribers before the election. Thanks, everybody.
Real quick, Meta just changed their algorithm to suppress political content. Please follow our Instagram at MeidasTouch right now as we head towards 400,000 followers so you don't miss a beat.